The suit tightens around me as the dropship shudders. Not a malfunction, a confirmation. Maglocks bite down across my shoulders and spine, drawing the armor in until it is no longer something I wear, but something I inhabit. The pressure equalizes across my chest and back, firm and deliberate, like a steady hand reminding me where my center of mass really is. I flex my left hand. The gauntlet mirrors the movement perfectly. Thick, articulated fingers, clad in layered composite plates, color-shifted to match the frozen planet's drab, dirty palette. Armor, scarred and burnished from 100 environments. Servos whisper under the motion, not loud, not dramatic, just enough sound to let me know the strength is there when I need it. Diagnostics scroll across the lower edge of my vision in muted green. Thermal integrity, nominal. Structural lattice, green across all load-bearing members. Life support reserves, 87 days. Munitions load, full. Fabrication charges, armed. Grav compensator, locked for descent. I don't rush the checks. Rushing is for people who think luck will carry them. The armor is built like a slab of intent, broad through the chest and shoulders, reinforced down the spine, legs thick with power and mass. Not sleek, not elegant, it was never meant to be. Every line exists because physics demanded it. Every plate overlaps with purpose. The armor doesn't promise speed. It promises that when something tries to stop me, it fails first. On the center of my chest plate, recessed into a rectangular armor panel, my name is stenciled in worn military drab. HALE. No first name, no rank, just the part of me the universe needs to know. Across from me, strapped into his crash frame, is my forward observer. My HUD tags him automatically the moment my visor finishes its sweep. A soft green identifier blooms in my vision, floating just above his chest plate, steady despite the turbulence. Rook, F.O. No rank, no first name, just function and trust. Rook's armor is lighter than mine, built for sensor fusion and comms dominance rather than brute control of terrain. Antenna housings are integrated cleanly along the helmet ridge. His shoulder plates are thinner, optimized to keep his profile narrow when he needs line of sight to the sky. He doesn't look at me while he runs his checks. He never does. We've been doing this too long for ceremony. His helmet is angled slightly downward, visor opaque, posture loose in that way that only comes from experience, the kind that survives its lessons. Forward observer, Earth Space Force Marines, attached to my squad, attached to my life. The big hammer. If I bend the battlefield, Rook brings the sky down on whatever refuses to bend with it. Thermals are ugly, he says over the squad net. His voice is calm, unhurried. Atmospheric interference is going to make precision strikes interesting. Interesting beats impossible, I reply. Agreed. The HUD fades to a dimmer persistent state, still there if I need it, never intrusive. Silence returns. Around us, the rest of the 12-man team lines the bay, armored figures locked into their frames. Each suit is different in subtle ways, weapon mounts, sensor clusters, limb reinforcement, tuned to the Marine inside it. Assault troopers carry heavier shoulder assemblies. The medic suit bulks at the hips and spine, expanded nanoforge capacity riding there like a promise. The scouts are leaner, joints optimized for movement, their armor built to disappear into terrain that wants to kill them. Mine is built to endure. Combat engineer. The armor reflects it. Reinforced legs for load bearing and impact, expanded power reserves buried deep in the torso, integrated terrain manipulation tools folded invisibly along my forearms and calves, demolition systems, route denial charges, rapid fortification emitters. I don't just fight enemies, I tell the battlefield how it's going to behave.
That idea is older than spaceflight, older than firearms. Armies figured it out back when war was still dirt and blood and ocean spray. You don't chase the enemy. You don't react to him. You shape the ground under his feet and make his choices hurt. Space didn't change that. It just made the consequences bigger. The suits are designed for extended operations, not hours, not days, months if necessary. Everything is internalized: nutrition synthesis, hydration cycling, waste reclamation, autonomous medical intervention. The old ways died quietly. Supply columns, rear areas, long, vulnerable lines stretching back to something called home. Those belonged to a universe where distance still mattered. Now you drop, you fight, and there are only three outcomes. You die, you win, or you get replaced and lifted back into orbit to do it again somewhere else. The Earth Expeditionary Space Forces don't expect rescue. They don't expect relief. They are the relief, delivered from a direction no one ever thinks to watch. The suits are nearly maintenance-free, self-healing composites, redundant systems layered 3 deep. They function in vacuum, radiation, corrosive atmospheres, electromagnetic storms, and cold that would shatter steel. Except when they don't. Nothing built by human hands is invincible. Anyone who says otherwise is selling faith instead of truth. Joints seize, actuators burn out, microfractures form where theory says they shouldn't. That's when the Marine matters. A warning tone pulses through the bay. 10 minutes to drop. The wounded recon team is still alive down there, barely. 8 of them pinned against a glacier face by something that evolved to hunt in this cold. They went in light. Scouts always do. They found more than they expected. Now we're going in heavy. Sounds of servos as Rook lifts his helmet armor, just enough to angle it toward me. Even without seeing his face, I know the expression, same one he's worn before every hard fight. Focused, calm, fully committed. "You good?" he asks. I nod once. Always. That's enough. We met in basic training, back when the armor was still something you earned, instead of something you lived inside. A lot of good men came and went after that, names etched into memorial walls scattered across worlds no civilian will ever see. Rook stayed, campaign after campaign, drop after drop, hell after hell. People call that luck.
They don't understand probability the way soldiers do. Luck is not a factor. Luck runs out. Discipline doesn't. Another tone. 5 minutes. The ship bucks as the pilot adjusts vector. Gravity surges, then smooths out as the compensators fight to keep us upright. Somewhere far above, orbital assets reposition. Patient, silent things waiting for Rook to speak their names. I run the checks again. Not because I have to, because ritual matters. This is the moment before the door opens, the narrow strip of time where everything that can be done has been done, and all that's left is execution. Over the years, I've learned to let my thoughts drift here. They always go back to the beginning, back to why I signed my name and accepted that centuries would pass while I slept. Back to the first time I stood inside armor like this and realized I was becoming something else. Back to the moment I met the man across from me and understood that whatever waited out there, I wouldn't face it alone. The lights shift from white to red. Gear down. Heavy locks disengage, the bay door mechanisms cycle, and cold bleeds in through seals rated for worlds that don't care if you survive. I plant my boots. Rook does the same. Door. The universe waits. And I remember who I was before I became HALE.
Chapter 2. Enlistment. I wasn't running from anything. People like to believe that men who enlist are escaping broken homes, empty lives, or bad decisions. It makes the choice easier for them to understand. It gives it a shape that fits inside their own experience. The truth is simpler. I was running toward something. Earth had been quiet for a long time by then. Not peaceful, quiet. The kind of quiet that comes when the dangerous work is done far away, out of sight, by people whose names never make it into conversation. I grew up watching ships leave. Not up close. You don't see them from the surface. You see the aftermath, the slow arc of light across the night sky. The brief flare as something enormous claws its way out of gravity's grip and never comes back the same way. Everyone knew what they were: expeditionary assets. Independent forces launched on timelines so long they stopped meaning anything to the people left behind. They didn't come home for parades. They didn't rotate back for rest cycles. They went out into the dark and stayed there, fighting wars that would be ancient history by the time the next message reached Earth. Most people didn't think about them at all. I thought about them constantly. Civilian life felt vapid to me. Not empty, just shallow. Conversations looped around the same small concerns. Time was measured in weeks, in promotions, in holidays planned years in advance. People talked about safety as if it were the highest possible good. They built lives designed to last. I wanted a life designed to matter. The recruiting station didn't try to sell me anything. That was the first sign I was in the right place. No holograms, no heroic music, no speeches about honor or destiny. Just a clean room, a steel desk, and a Marine in a simple duty uniform who looked like he hadn't slept much in the last decade. He didn't ask me why I was there. He already knew. "You understand," he said, sliding the datapad across the desk, "that if you sign this, you're not enlisting in a service." I looked down at the contract. It was longer than anything I had ever read. Clauses stacked on clauses, timelines measured in relativistic drift instead of years. "I understand," I said. "You are volunteering for separation, temporal, physical, social. You will leave everyone you know behind. They will age, you won't. You will miss entire eras." "I understand." He studied me for a long moment. Not suspicious, not impressed, just thorough. Most people say they understand. Very few actually do. I met his eyes. "I don't want a life that makes sense from the outside." That earned a nod. Basic training stripped away anything that didn't belong. It wasn't brutal for the sake of brutality. That kind of training is inefficient. It was precise, relentless, designed to break habits instead of bodies. You learned how to move before you learned how to fight, how to stand, how to wait, how to obey without resentment and question without hesitation. Discipline wasn't enforced through punishment. It was explained over and over until you saw the logic in it yourself. Every mistake cost the group. Every success belonged to it. Sleep came when it was allowed. Food came when it was earned. Privacy disappeared entirely. You learned very quickly that individuality wasn't removed, it was refined. Everything unnecessary burned away, leaving only what functioned under pressure. The armor came later. They didn't let us see it at first, not up close, just silhouettes behind reinforced glass. Massive shapes suspended in maintenance frames, dull and motionless, like something asleep rather than inactive. When they finally brought us into the bay, no one spoke. The suits weren't beautiful. They were honest. No curves for aesthetics, no lines that didn't serve load distribution or energy flow. Every plate existed because something, somewhere, had tried to kill a Marine in an earlier version and almost succeeded. "This," the instructor said, his voice echoing through the bay, "is not a vehicle." He let that sink in. "It is not a weapon. It is not a tool you step into and step out of when the workday ends." We stood at attention, eyes forward. "It is an extension of you," he continued. "It amplifies what you already are. If you are disciplined, it will make you unstoppable. If you are careless, it will make you dead faster than you can regret it. They didn't turn the systems on. Not yet. First came doctrine, strategy, history. Campaigns fought across distances so vast the human mind resisted holding them all at once. We learned why expeditionary forces were deployed, why they were independent, and what happened when supply lines were treated as assumptions instead of vulnerabilities. We learned why engineers mattered, why shaping terrain was more important than chasing enemies, why control always beat aggression in the long run. That's where I met Rook. Not formally, no handshake, no moment worth remembering on its own, just another Marine in formation, another presence that stayed consistent as others rotated out, failed assessments, or chose different paths. He asked better questions than most. Not louder, not more frequent, just sharper. When the armor finally powered up for the first time, the bay felt different, alive. The suit sealed around me in stages, each layer locking into place with mechanical certainty. Pressure equalized, systems synchronized, the HUD flickered into existence, faint green lines and data framing the world instead of replacing it. I remember the weight, not crushing, reassuring. I remember taking my first step and realizing that gravity was now a negotiation instead of a law. I remember understanding in that moment that there was no version of civilian life waiting for me anymore. We learned how to fight in them, how to work in them, how to sleep without ever taking them off, how to trust systems that would keep us alive when consciousness couldn't. We learned restraint. Power without discipline is just noise. By the time we boarded our first deployment vessel, Earth already felt distant. Not physically, emotionally. The planet was still there, still turning, still full of people living lives that made sense to them. We were becoming something else. Something that went where it was needed and stayed until the problem no longer existed.
As the cryo chambers closed for the first time and the world narrowed to a single breath before sleep took me, I remember thinking one thing with perfect clarity. This wasn't sacrifice, this was commitment, and I had never felt more certain of anything in my life.
Chapter 3. The Long Dark. Space travel isn't like the old stories. There's no sense of motion once you're underway. No rumble of engines, no stars streaking past in dramatic lines. Acceleration happens slowly, deliberately, over days and weeks, until the numbers say you're moving at a velocity that would have terrified earlier generations. You don't feel it. You feel the waiting. The deployment vessel was built like everything else in the expeditionary forces, functional, modular, and indifferent to comfort beyond what was required to keep people effective. Long corridors, reinforced bulkheads, compartments stacked around central spines like ribs around a skeleton. There were no windows. Windows were a liability, and sentiment wasn't worth dying for. Before we went under, there was a briefing, not inspirational, not ceremonial, just facts, delivered cleanly. We were not traveling at light speed. That remained impossible. Mass, energy, causality, physics was stubborn about certain things. You could approach it asymptotically, leading enormous amounts of energy for diminishing returns, but crossing that line was still fantasy. We would get close enough for time to start behaving strangely. At relativistic velocities, clocks don't agree with each other anymore. Time aboard the ship would pass more slowly than time back on Earth. Not dramatically, not at first, but over the distances involved, the difference would accumulate. Months for us, centuries for them. The expeditionary forces were built around that reality.
There was no command chain stretching back to Earth in any meaningful sense. By the time orders arrived, the context that created them would already be obsolete. Orders and telemetry moved faster than light. Everything else moved too slowly to matter. Earth could see us, it just couldn't touch us. So we were given intent, not instructions. Find the threat, end it, move on. Cryosleep wasn't like sleeping. Sleep is rest. Cryo was suspension. The cryogenic chamber handled most of it. Metabolism slowed to a whisper. Muscles stimulated just enough to prevent atrophy. Neural activity dampened. Consciousness folded inward until thoughts stretched and finally snapped. The last thing I saw before the chamber sealed was my cryo HUD, dim and minimalist. HALE, status, ready. Across the bay, another identifier flickered briefly into view as my visor tracked movement. Rook, foe. No words passed between us. There was nothing left to say that mattered. The chamber closed. Cold took me. Dreams came, but they weren't dreams in any human sense. Fragments, sensations without narrative, a sense of falling without direction, of pressure without pain. Then, nothing. Waking up was worse. Not painful, disorienting. Systems came online in sequence, one after another, like distant lights flicking on across a dark landscape. Sensation returned before context, weight, temperature, the low hum of power running through hull and chamber alike. The chamber opened. I stepped out into a ship that was older than the one I'd boarded.
Not structurally. The vessel maintained itself better than any living thing could, but historically. Internal clocks marked the passage of time in numbers that meant very little until you compared them to Earth reference. 312 years had passed back home. For me, it had been 8 months. No one talked about it at first. You learned quickly that dwelling on it served no purpose. The people you'd known were gone. Their children were gone. Their civilizations had shifted in ways you couldn't predict or influence. Earth was no longer a place you remembered. It was a direction. That was the real separation, not distance, not time, but relevance. You existed now in a moving bubble of purpose, drifting through a universe that would never wait for you to catch up. That was why expeditionary forces were self-contained. We carried factories with us, fabricators that could turn raw material into armor plates, munitions, replacement components, mining rigs capable of cracking asteroids or stripping planetary crusts when needed, agricultural systems tuned for efficiency, not beauty. When we found a suitable system, we didn't ask permission, we parked. Sometimes for years. Planets that had never known intelligent life suddenly hosted human industry. Temporary cities grew under artificial skies. Ore flowed. Crops grew in stacked trays under calibrated light. Armor was repaired. Hulls were reforged. Marines trained, drilled, waited. Combat engineers were critical then. We weren't just fighters. We were builders, miners, architects of temporary worlds. We learned how to read geology the way others read enemy movement, how to extract what we needed without destabilizing the ground under our feet. Those periods were strange, too long to feel like shore leave, too quiet to feel like home. Some of the planets were beautiful in ways Earth never had time to be. Blue water stretching to the horizon, mountains untouched by erosion, skies free of traffic, pollution, history. Paradise, if you were inclined to see it that way. Most of us weren't. Too much stillness made you soft in places you couldn't afford to be soft. Training never stopped, neither did discipline.
You could feel the edge dulling if you let it, and that scared people more than combat ever did. Eventually, the tasking came. Somewhere, a species had made a decision. They had reached outward instead of inward. They had crossed a line, attacked something under Earth's protection, or ignored warnings delivered clearly and without ambiguity. They were always different. Different biology, different technology, different ways of thinking. Some were expansionist, some were predators, some believed themselves inevitable. None of that mattered. What mattered was that they had earned attention. The expeditionary forces didn't arrive loudly, no announcements, no demands. We came from angles no one monitored, from systems written off as empty or irrelevant. By the time the enemy realized they were under attack, the battlefield had already been shaped. Routes denied, resources cut, gravity turned against them. The sky no longer belonged to them. An Earth-space expeditionary force did its work quietly, efficiently, and effectively. Coordinates flowed, windows opened, the big hammer fell when it needed to. And when it was over, there was no celebration, just assessment. If the lesson had been learned, we moved on. If it hadn't, extinction followed.
Then the cycle began again. Refit, travel, sleep, wake, fight. Time blurred. Centuries passed between campaigns back home. On board, we aged slowly, deliberately, carried forward by purpose rather than years. We became a kind of constant, a force that didn't negotiate, didn't posture, didn't threaten. It simply arrived. And somewhere in the long dark between stars, I realized that this was the only life I could have ever wanted. Because out here, nothing was abstract. Everything mattered.
Chapter 4: First Contact.
We hope you enjoyed the story. There's more to come. Subscribe down below. These stories are written by us, helped by AI, and then we put it all together and bring it to you. Stay tuned for the next story coming your way.